Wrestling fans, it's time for another edition of The Voice of Wrestling right here at voiceofwrestling.net and FITE.tv. I'm your host, Chris Cash, alongside Nick Paglino, and we've got plenty to discuss tonight, plus a special interview with Johnny Impact of Impact Wrestling. And Nick, how's it been going this week?
Good week, big week, lot to talk about. We've got controversy on both sides of the professional wrestling coin right now.
It's true.
Of course, Impact Wrestling had the Bound for Glory pay-per-view this past Sunday. That ended on a very controversial note. And then WWE is looking ahead to Crown Jewel in Saudi Arabia, and the last week has seen huge developments in terms of the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
There are a lot of tensions right now mounting against WWE for continuing to go through with the Crown Jewel event. So controversy all abound, and we are going to discuss it here on The Voice of Wrestling.
Yeah, and also just we'll follow up on some things happening on Raw this week, of course, later on in the show. However, we're going to kick it off this week, kind of going in a direction we never go in here on The Voice of Wrestling, talking some Impact Wrestling here on the main event. It's the main event here on The Voice of Wrestling. Chris Cash, Nick Paglino, and Nick, obviously, as you alluded to earlier, a little bit of controversy surrounding the Bound for Glory pay-per-view, and of course, specifically the main event between Austin Aries and Johnny Impact, who again we're going to have on. It's a pre-recorded interview though prior to Bound for Glory, so we didn't get the opportunity to talk to him, but about this specific incident. You did get the opportunity, Nick, though, to ask him a little bit about kind of the backstory leading into this match. And his thoughts on kind of this shoot work thing that they have going on. Why don't you kind of lay out the details as we know it at this point, and then of course we can kind of analyze, dissect it afterward.
Sure. Just to sort of bring everybody up to speed, heading into Bound for Glory, it really appeared to me as if Impact Wrestling was sort of towing this line between reality and fiction, work versus shoot, which, is not going to come to a surprise by many fans of pro wrestling right now. We are in what most people refer to as the reality era. We're going to talk about it a little later on the show with Ronda Rousey on Raw this week, taking seriously personal shots at Nikki Bella and her relationship with John Cena. So the idea of the worked shoot feud heading into a pay-per-view is nothing really new, but the way this all transpired with Johnny Impact and Austin Aries really left a lot of fans scratching their heads after the pay-per-view. So heading into Bound for Glory, there was a Twitter back and forth, so to speak. Really, it turned into a Twitter war between Impact and Austin Aries, in which Aries eventually had to delete one of his tweets because in the tweet he sort of made a homophobic reference to Johnny Impact's in-ring gear. He then took a pretty personal shot at Taya Valkyrie, who is Johnny Impact's real-life wife, calling her quote-unquote husky. This led to a serious back and forth, not only between Aries and Johnny Impact, but Aries took a lot of heat from fans on social media, so much so that he had to delete the tweet referencing the remark about Impact's gear and Taya Valkyrie. We're going to talk about that in the interview with Johnny Impact. You're going to hear his thoughts on how he reacted to that tweet and just his thoughts in general and his mindset and his feeling toward Austin Aries heading into Bound for Glory. Then a most interesting thing happened. I would say interesting is putting it lightly. A most interesting thing happened in the main event at Bound for Glory, in which Johnny Impact hit his finishing move at the end of the match, landed the pinfall 1, 2, 3 on Austin Aries, and immediately after the ref counted 3, Austin Aries completely no-sold the finish, jumped up to his feet, flipped off the entire arena, sort of gestured toward Impact management, looked visibly unhappy with what went down in the match, and stormed out. Now, what we do know is that Austin Aries was not at the Impact Wrestling TV tapings that took place on Monday. Now, since this show is being taped on Tuesday, they have one more night which is tonight. It is unknown whether or not Aries will be at those tapings, but it is expected that he will not be, since he did go home after Bound for Glory and was not at the tapings on Monday night. So even if he does appear at the tapings tonight, they taped a few weeks worth of content on Monday night, so he won't be appearing on Impact Wrestling anytime soon, specifically not this week, to address what went down at Bound for Glory. The reason why Aries was not at the tapings this week is not because of what happened in the end of his main event match at Bound for Glory. It was reported by Petey Williams, Impact star Petey Williams, on his podcast that Austin Aries, actually his contract expired on Sunday, and his last contracted match with Impact Wrestling was against Johnny Impact at Bound for Glory. So him not being at the tapings on Monday and Tuesday was simply a case of him not signing a new deal yet, which leads me to believe, while I have not confirmed it, and it has not been confirmed whether or not the finish of that match was a work or a shoot, it leads me to believe it was all work, because I would think Impact Wrestling would have immediately taken action against Austin Aries for going into business with himself and fired him. But that was not the case. So that's where we're at right now with Austin Aries' status with Impact Wrestling and what we know about what has become a very controversial finish to the Bound for Glory main event.
So we talked a little bit before we went on the air today, and I know you kind of gave your opinion on some of this, Nick, and I think there's a possibility we might disagree in some of this, because sure. I feel like I kind of know your stance, but I want you to put it out there here in a minute as well. Me personally, as far as just kind of the facts of the matter, I tend to agree with you that maybe I don't know that the finish was planned. I don't know that the no sell was planned. That could have just been Austin Aries kind of going into business for himself. But obviously the tension, the history leading up to this match, that was well documented. I mean, that's been the case. It's not something new. Whether Impact officials are kind of giving them the green light or even encouraging these two guys to kind of take it a step further, I would imagine they would have said knock all this stuff out a long time ago if that's not the direction they kind of wanted to go in. Now, I would imagine that there could be some issues with the contract. So if the contract did expire and that was his last match and they just did not work out a new deal, maybe there's some contract disputes that's kind of underlying this entire issue. Why would they have such kind of a red hot feud and just allow, even if he shows up at the tapings tonight, as you mentioned, he's still going to have several weeks worth of tapings where he's not a part of that, unless they wanted to kind of go back and record some stuff in post that they can throw in there, some behind the scenes stuff that they could easily put together and air. But as far as in the arena and their traditional tapings, he was not there for at least a few weeks worth. So I feel like this is kind of a situation where there's probably some real life stuff going on that we don't know about that would allow Austin to kind of walk out, go home, not be at the tapings, and it could be just as easy as contract disputes. And then, of course, there's what's on the surface and the way that this storyline and the match, of course, subsequently has played out. Let's say, Nick, there's two options here. Let's say the majority of this was a work. The majority or all of this was basically a work. Maybe there's some ad-libbing in between, but at the end of the day, this is 100% a work. Officials knew pretty much everything going into it. They even knew the finish, and they knew what he was going to do after the match. Let's say this is just something that's going to get people talking, because that's what they want. And then the other option being, this is not a work. It's complete shoot, and Impact officials were completely blindsided by what took place at Bound for Glory. We'll talk about the latter of those scenarios in a minute, but let's talk about kind of this worked shoot environment that we've been discussing and has been around in pro wrestling for years. You're not a big fan of it if that's the case, right? You don't think this is what should be the attention, what fans should be, spending their attention on, because you don't think there's much that can come out of a kind of a shoot angle like this, correct?
Well, this specific kind of shoot angle.
Okay.
I am in no way opposed to the work shoot, tightrope, and is it a shoot? Is it not?
Right.
I mean, case in point, what we saw with Ronda Rousey and Nikki Bella. I mean, she's making shoot comments. Those are worked shoot comments. They're based on real life. I have no problem with that. And really, everything leading up to Bound for Glory, all the Twitter stuff, and again, personal feelings aside, and we will talk a little bit about that more. And I did ask Johnny Impact in the interview, to what extent do pro wrestlers have to be held accountable for things they say on Twitter? To what extent is it an excuse to say, well, I'm selling a pay-per-view, I tweeted that in character? So personal feelings about those Twitter comments aside, I had no problem with the way this reality versus fiction, work versus shoot aspect of the feud culminated. I thought it was great. And it certainly got people talking and hyping the match. The problem I had is Austin Aries no-selling a finishing move. Because, and I've been, one great thing about the way we record this show is we get a couple of days to sort of marinate, after we see something. And really also, scope the canvas of reactions that are out there. And I've really seen a lot of reactions to this, from hardcore fans on social media to people talking about it on other podcasts and radio shows. And for me, I'm really not getting all caught up in this idea of, well, was it a work? Was it a shoot? I'm an audience member and I'm watching a story. And what I watched was a guy hit a finishing move and the other guy get right up afterward.
Right.
So you're telling me either wrestling is fake, and you're literally telling me that at the end of your pay-per-view, or you're telling me Johnny Impact must have the weakest finishing move in the history of wrestling. And then if that's the case, then why is it that the weakest finishing move in wrestling was able to pin your champion 1, 2, 3? Right. So as an audience member, this is the story that you're telling me at the end of this. And what I'd equate it to is, if you're watching a movie and they're building to the climax of the film and, it's okay, they're going to reveal who's the murderer, who's the guy who committed the murder. And all of a sudden, all of the actors turn to the camera and just say, well, nobody committed a murder because, this isn't real. There's a screenplay. Somebody wrote it. I'm not really, I'm just an actor. I'm not really this character. My name's Johnny Depp. That's Angelina Jolie. We're two actors in a movie. That's what I would equate this to. You're breaking the fourth wall and you're telling me that this is fake. And I have seen a lot of people react on social media saying, well, kayfabe is dead. Well, everybody knows kayfabe is dead. Right. But does that give them the liberty then to tell you that on television?
I don't think, but let me kind of go a different route, because I think that this could have been sold without him no-selling the actual move. But let's also not forget
what could have been.
No, I'm just saying that I'm saying that the shoot part of this, like him right. he could have stayed down an extra 10 seconds and then still flipped everybody off on the way. It was a sign of disrespect to obviously it seemed like Johnny Impact. By not allowing him his time in the sun while Austin is down on the mat. And of course, it seemed like it was a sign of disrespect to Impact officials, which, I mean, again, we don't know how much of this is work and how much of this is shoot. But let me also take it like kind of a different direction in what you're trying to...
Not to interrupt, but okay, you're acknowledging it as a sign of disrespect to Johnny Impact and Impact Wrestling officials. Is it not a sign of disrespect to the fans?
Well, that's where I think we disagree, in the sense that I think you give fans in general a little bit too much credit. Fans, even when there's not a work shoot thing going on, wrestlers no-sell other people's finishers all the time as a part of a match. I mean, how many times do we see John Cena take a finisher? How many times have we seen him give a finisher? How many times have we seen The Undertaker raise up immediately after a finisher? This is not something where, I know in this particular scenario, we're going to dissect it and we're going to spend a lot of time on the no-sell, which it clearly was one. But I don't think the casual fans, and I still think there's separation. There's a far less separation of casual fans and internet fans that follow kind of the dirt sheets and all of that. I think that gap is kind of, shortening. However, there are still a ton of casual fans and even internet wrestling fans that follow the dirt sheets and stuff that don't necessarily look at that stuff unless they're told to look at that stuff, because it is really common occurrence for it to happen in everyday matches all the time, especially in big high profile matches that you want a massive, big time exciting finish. Hell, it's normally just finisher after finisher after finisher after finisher. How many times can you reverse the tombstone, hit the tombstone, kick out of the tombstone, and then, etc. So to me, I don't look at this as that big of a deal.
But Chris, is that not always a built-in component to the match where,
yes,
John Cena is kicking out of the tombstone and then the announce team is putting over, my God, the incredible strength of John Cena. He kicks out of the tombstone.
Right.
This didn't have anything to do with the story of the match.
No.
This was, he lost the match 1, 2, 3.
Right.
And, and look.
Well, and what, kind of going along that line.
Really dissect this down to, all right, what is a finishing move? And, and I really honestly have heard people get into this argument where they say, look, let's remember what the idea of winning a wrestling match is. All you need to do is pin your opponent's shoulders to the mat for a count of 3. You don't have to knock him out. You don't have to kill him. Only in pro wrestling is this idea, because we call it a finishing move, right? It finishes a guy.
Sure.
It finishes the match is what it does. By design, a finishing move should be something that incapacitates you for 3 seconds. So not something that kills you, but, that's what these moves are nowadays. And the way we see professional wrestlers sell finishing moves, typically when it ends a match, is they're down and out and they're unconscious, or if it's a submission move, they're selling the injured arm or the leg, whatever was used to submit. But in this case, it was not a component of the match. If you see Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar go at it, I mean, okay, how many times did Roman Reigns hit Brock Lesnar with the Superman punch?
Right.
And that's a component of the match. Michael Cole hit 5 Superman punches. And then what did Brock Lesnar hit Roman Reigns with? What? 7 F5s. It's a component of the match to help put over that the wrestler has this kind of strength.
I agree.
And to me, that was not a component of the match at Bound
Let's
for Glory.
kind of talk about some of the stuff that, obviously when you think about, okay, whether you agree or disagree with the tactics or the finish or the no-sell or anything like that, let's talk about kind of the conversation now coming out of this. Bully Ray mentioned it on his podcast. Was this overall worth it? And what is the result of this now, in the sense that, hey, this is the first time, Nick, you and I have mentioned Impact Wrestling on our show in months. Obviously, it's getting people talking for the wrong reasons, the right reasons. That might be up for debate, but let's at least call a spade and say they are getting people talking. Now, you and I will disagree, I guess, in this again, and that I'm going to likely, to bring up a good old friend of mine, Vince Russo. I would take his approach to booking wrestling more than I would kind of take a traditional approach to booking, storylines and angles and superstars and wrestling matches, etc. And that, look, your whole point is not to try and impress the people that are already there. I mean, yes, you're trying to hold their attention. Your job is to get new people coming over. Where is Impact now? And where have they been forever? They've been, in that 230,000 a week to 250,000 viewers a week.
Yeah, and heading into Bound for Glory, it was one of the worst numbers they've had all year. So under 200,000.
How do you get those numbers up? Because here's the thing, Nick, and I think your argument might be something along the lines of, and you can explain it here in a minute, but you had great wrestling on Bound for Glory, and people are talking about this finish and not those matches. Well, here's the problem. If there's not people to watch those good matches, it doesn't matter that there's good matches. It's just, if people aren't in the forest to see the damn tree fall, what's the point, and there isn't one. To me, if this is going to bring more people over because they see a storyline that can blur that reality, or the line between what's work and what's shoot, which when you do it right, Nick, that is what makes a good wrestling storyline anyway. Now, they're obviously going right for the jugular in that sense and saying, look, we're making this more real than fake. But yet at the end of the day, it is getting people talking, and I feel like that should be Impact's number one goal, because they have done a shitty job of it up to this point. So to me, hats off, kudos to whether Impact had anything to do with this Impact management or whether this was all Austin Aries just kind of going and into business for himself. Now, here's my problem with the Nick, and then I'll give you time to kind of follow up on all of this, is where's the follow-up? If this was a work, it makes me think this was more shoot, because if he's not there at these tapings this week, you're squandering what the hell you're doing this for in the first place. So if he's not signed and they're not going to follow up on this real life feeling, storyline and any new eyeballs that might come over now, once he's gone, the fans are kind of over it. Johnny Impact isn't about to take this ball and run with it anywhere. So you kind of have to have Austin Aries. And if he's not there, what was the point of all of this?
How are you going to follow up on it anyway, though? So if it's a work, and again, to go back to this idea of getting the fans talking, it is very possible, much like WWE does sometimes. Impact management or professional wrestling management in general is not even thinking long term. It's, let's pop the crowd this one night. Let's get this reaction tonight. Let's get them buzzing and talking about this finish tonight. And we'll deal with tomorrow.
Sure.
And we'll deal with Tuesday on Tuesday. But even if there was a plan in place, let's say, this, again, I'm looking at it from both sides of the coin. If it was I don't see how they get themselves out of this. If it was a work, what do you have Austin Aries say? What is his promo the next night? Hey, I want to take this time and explain to you all why I no-sold Johnny Impact's finish. I mean, come on. Now obviously he can cut the promo about, what is he going to say? I was unhappy with the creative decision going into the pay-per-view that Impact management made me lose the match. There's no way you address this from a storyline standpoint.
No, that's not true. I think you're not
how do you do it without acknowledging that kayfabe was broken somewhere?
Okay, I'm not saying that there's not going to be kind of a blurred line of that too. I just think that you got to give Austin Aries a little bit more credit in that department and how he can sell this without. I mean, remember CM Punk sitting at the top of the stage and talking about John Cena, and of course that skyrocketed his career. Not saying Austin Aries is doing that. Not saying that it's going to have any type of result like that one did. But
you're right. And the pipe bomb promo, now that you say that, I did think of that, and the difference there is,
well, there's not
alluding to, I mean, yes, wrestlers oftentimes talk about the direction this company is going,
right?
And that's a long way around saying creative direction, the writing, the booking,
right.
They won't use the words booking or that kind of thing.
Right. Well, there's nothing to compare it to, though. We have
seen that. We have seen wrestlers somewhat break that kayfabe in promos before. But in this specific case, I'm not sure how you follow this up with any kind of it would probably have to be him just saying, I'm pissed off that you're going to put a guy like Johnny Impact
100%.
in the main event,
right?
And this company, he's everything that's wrong with wrestling,
right,
and blah blah blah. But that doesn't explain or address the giant elephant in the room, which is sold a professional wrestling finisher, and that has fans scratching their head, because I think as much as fans were wondering whether or not it was a work or shoot, I think fans were also just plain confused by what they saw.
Yeah.
And that is an issue.
I think all right, but here's where it goes. You leave that unspoken. You've got to leave that unspoken in the sense that he's not going to come out here and be like, I know sold. He's not using that. It's not as soon as as soon as he has that next one-liner that feels emotional and everything, fans will forget about the fact that he actually knows sold. But if he comes out and if they get to utilize him, and if this was me writing this and me pushing the envelope here, I'm having him come out and talk about how he has so little respect for Johnny Impact at this point that he can't even stomach being in the same room with him, let alone in the same ring, etc. And you're basically acknowledging the no-sell without ever bringing attention to it. Just saying, I don't respect him. And here's why. List all your reasons. And you've got, again, I think I give Austin Aries enough credit at this point to, again, make it seem like it's true and real. And then, of course, Johnny has to play his part if this is an actual work. But let's if this was a work, Nick, it just makes no sense that he's not at the tapings, that they don't have contractual stuff worked out. That's why part of me thinks this could be very isolated.
Impact Wrestling's done that a lot, though, where, you see guys, AJ Styles, they put the title on AJ Styles, and he didn't have a contract with the company. You've seen this, and I understand that new Impact management might be different, and that might not be the kind of business that's conducted anymore, and certainly the way business is conducted in that company has probably evolved through the years, but, it is not without it's not impossible to think that there wasn't a long-term plan in place. Impact Wrestling is very used to losing talents by the handful week in and week out. Sometimes from one taping to the next, you never know if you're going to have a top star. And are you going to lose somebody to Ring of Honor or to WWE, or are they just not going to be able to pay this talent, and so they're gone? So I'm not going to put it past a company like Impact Wrestling to book a finish like that at a pay-per-view, even though they know they're probably not really going to be able to follow up on it. But to go back to your point, which is that people are talking about this as opposed to the finish, or excuse me, they're talking about the finish of this pay-per-view as opposed to, say, the quality of the wrestling. And I completely agree with you that, if a great wrestling match takes place in the woods and there's nobody there to see it, does it make a sound? I get that analogy, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's really been Impact Wrestling's biggest problem throughout its years, because a lot of people will argue Impact is delivering its strongest product to date right now.
Yeah.
Yet the numbers do not reflect that because people don't know what's going on. Explain to me how an end of this main event at Bound for Glory is going to get people to watch your show.
It doesn't if Austin's not there.
If he's not there.
I mean that's my thing. That's the
so
part.
They can't follow up. They can't even promote.
Then that's on them.
Tune in this week to see what happened with the controversial main event at Bound for Glory.
Well, they could try to carry it with Johnny, but and have him address it and all that. Yes, look, I'm holding judgment at this point until I see how they follow up. Because to me, if a month from now, Nick, we look back and this is all there was to it, just a controversial finish that's never followed up on. Now Johnny goes and he works his next angle, his next storyline, and Austin goes off and it's officially done. I'm assuming too that's why you haven't seen anything by Austin on Twitter just yet. They're still negotiating most likely. And if they are, then I'm holding judgment to see how they follow up with this. And of course, you'll see ratings as well. You'll see if those kind of spike just a little. I don't see anything significant coming out of it yet, but at least, from a terms of overall quality, if you get me talking about your product because I can't tell if it's real or fake, you're doing something right, because that's that kind of secret element in pro wrestling where, when Brock comes over and he's a legitimate badass because he was a legitimate badass in UFC for a period of time. Ronda the same way. We look at these people the same way. Stone Cold was a legitimate badass, etc. That's the hidden element to wrestling that is so hard to manufacture and duplicate. You can't get that. Austin and them did this really kind of, under the rug a little, like it was kind of behind the scenes. And then all of a sudden, here's this big controversial finish that nobody saw coming. And, it does get people talking. I don't know how much it's going to amount to, Nick. I just know that it's difficult to really dissect this or assess this without knowing the details of contractual, situation stuff now with Austin Aries. Is there going to be follow-uppers or not? If this is one and done, if this is done, Nick, if Austin Aries is done and this whole thing is done, then it was pointless at the end of the day.
To me, that has to be the explanation here. This has to have been a shoot in order for any of this to make sense, because, it's like I'm sitting here imagining I'm a guy who loves Impact Wrestling, and I'm calling you on the phone and saying, hey, man, you got to watch Impact Wrestling. It's so awesome. They no-sell each other's finishers. It's the best show I've ever seen, because after you pay your $40 to watch it, they tell you that it's all fake. So it's awesome. You don't even have to wait for your dad or your mom to walk in the room, or your girlfriend to say, hey, isn't this garbage fake? They tell you right at the end of the show that it's fake. This has got to be a shoot to me. If I find out in a week or in a day or after the tapings this week conclude that, hey, Aries went into business with himself, Impact Wrestling officials are furious, I would sit here and say, okay, this all makes sense to me now. But in any other way, and I'm sure, we will talk about this again next week on the show after we're able to watch, the Impact Wrestling show that's airing this week, which is going to feature the Bound for Glory fallout. If it's not a shoot, I just don't see how they're going to work this all out to make it that interesting to me that I'm going to want to keep watching it.
Well,
I want to be talking about, if I'm going to be telling people about the Impact Wrestling product, is they took the freaking mat off the ring, and they had the hardwood boards there, and LAX took on the OGs in an incredible, brutal looking tag team match that is something I've personally never seen before, watching guys taking bumps on the actual ring without that padded canvas there. I would just much rather be talking about that and promoting that aspect of your product than what we saw at the end of the show tonight.
I'm going to finish with this. If Austin is there and this was a work and they follow up and they keep it moving, we can reassess this a month from now and see how they follow up and how it goes. If this was a shoot, as you mentioned, Nick, Austin Aries is the dumbest person I've ever met, because now, Nick, this is no longer about just Impact Wrestling. If this is revealed to be a legitimate shoot and Austin Aries going into business for himself, he's not to be trusted. He's not to be trusted by anybody that would hire him, by anybody that would get in the ring with him. And I would imagine that that's kind of one of those codes within, the wrestling business that you've got to make sure you try. And that is the ultimate sign of disrespect, which again, you can pass it all off if it's a work for an angle and you're just trying to make your money. But if he did all of this on his own, Impact should release a statement and said it's unacceptable and let him go find his own way. And then for any independent wrestling promoter, he would never get a job back in WWE at this point. I couldn't imagine Vince and Triple H, if they heard about this, would ever give him the time of day. So it's career suicide otherwise. And I just don't want to think of Austin Aries as an idiot, because to me, that's what that means if it's a real life shoot.
Well, wait a minute. You're only an idiot if you don't know that's career suicide.
That could be career suicide, right?
He may have said to himself, I know exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm committing career suicide, and guess what? I don't give a shit.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna no-sell this guy's finish. Well, I'm gonna tell the whole world exactly what I think about the way I am used. I already told WWE, and now I'm telling Impact Wrestling this here. This is how you're using me, and this is my response.
Goals.
Bully Ray, to bring him up again, he did mention on Busted Open Radio this week, he said, hey, work or shoot, Austin Aries is only happy when Austin Aries is getting what he wants. And when he's not getting what he wants, he can be rather unpleasant. So, I'm paraphrasing a bit there, but he was speaking towards Austin Aries' character a bit, and we've heard this. We haven't heard this just from Bully Ray. We have heard this from other wrestlers who have said he can be difficult. To me, there's got to be a big difference between difficult and then what you'd see on Sunday, which is completely disrespecting the end of a main event, a pay-per-view main event match like that. And I completely agree with you, Chris. Not only would I believe it is career suicide, it should be career suicide, and Impact would have every right in the world to fire him after a stunt like that.
And not just disrespecting the main event, disrespecting the entire industry and the fans, and that's when you can group it all in together. So we will follow up with this, obviously, because it is a pretty interesting story coming out of Impact Wrestling, and anytime there's an interesting story coming out of Impact Wrestling, we want to give it its time. So we will follow up, but that's been the main event here on The Voice of Wrestling. And when we come back, we're going to air the Johnny Impact interview that Nick just had, so we can kind of get a little bit from the horse's mouth. Obviously, this was recorded before Bound for Glory, but it's still very, very relevant, and we want to play that for you. And then obviously when that's over, we're still coming back, Nick and myself, to discuss what went down on Monday Night Raw this week and the controversy between WWE and Saudi Arabia, the United States and Saudi Arabia, and how that now is kind of taking the direction of a potential backlash if WWE's not careful. But does Vince McMahon care? We'll find out. Johnny Impact is next here on The Voice of Wrestling. This has been the main event.
What's up, wrestling fans? This is Nick Paglino of The Voice of Wrestling here on Fight TV. I'm being joined at this time by Impact Wrestling star Johnny Impact. Johnny, how you doing, man?
Doing great, brother. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for coming on. So, of course, huge Bound for Glory pay-per-view taking place in New York City. Of course, the huge talk right now is the back and forth between you and Austin Aries, which took place on Twitter recently. And, obviously, you guys are selling a pay-per-view. Austin Aries himself had said he's selling a pay-per-view. But at what point do you feel like perhaps he crossed the line from selling a pay-per-view into reality?
When did he thought he was selling a pay-per-view?
Didn't he try to defend himself? I mean, I know he deleted his tweet. Didn't he try to say he was
backpedaling, right? So, because he clearly said a couple things he regretted immediately because everyone jumped out of the woodwork to jump on him, and then he said, "Oh, I'm just selling a pay-per-view."
Right,
sure,
exactly.
Sure, you're selling a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Frame it as a hypothetical, like if I said these things, which you clearly said, and you used the hypothetical as a mechanism to leave yourself a way out, people jump on you anyway, and then you backpedal. Okay.
So when you're reading all of this and you're reacting to it, I mean, how much of this is you reacting as Johnny Impact versus you're reacting as John Hennigan? He was taking some serious shots there.
Oh, I mean, yeah, like you can tell the difference between two guys that are like having a good time reacting back and forth. When he said what he said about Ty, I reacted seriously. I reacted like a man who just saw someone tweet about his wife being husky, and to me, that crosses a couple of lines. I'm not the Twitter police. I tweet plenty of weird stuff, so it's not my place to say what was right or wrong morally about what Austin twat. But as this is what I said in my response to him. I know what pisses me off. I know what I feel like where he crossed the line with me personally, and that's when he brought in Taya and started besmirching her on Twitter, and that to me got to me because he wouldn't say that to me face to face. He wouldn't say that to her face to face. He wouldn't say that if we were even in the same building. He would, however, tweet it, I guess, when he's at home and he knows that we're in different cities because he doesn't have to worry about how pissed I am.
Right.
And that to me is. It shows a lot about him. He's so upset that I made a goofy short joke that his response is he tweets about personal attacks about my wife. That's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah. Do you think that, in this climate right now, where people are losing their jobs, we saw it with Roseanne Barr. We even saw it in the situation with Dave Bautista when he came to defend the Guardians of the Galaxy director who was fired over Twitter comments he made. These were over a decade old. Do you think pro wrestlers need to be careful with what they're tweeting? And do you think maybe that's one of the reasons why Austin Aries kind of backpedaled and said that he was doing it to promote a fight or to promote a pay-per-view?
And look, like I'm a First Amendment guy, freedom of speech. The Guardians of the Galaxy thing, like James Gunn, I can't even remember exactly what he said, but he made several comments that he absolutely should not have made a long time ago. I sometimes feel like society could develop thicker skin about some of that type of stuff. So it's not my place to say, like, oh, like Austin needs to be careful about calling my tights gay. Personally, I laugh that off because I know that's just him trying to get under my skin. And back to like what I'm upset about is him saying something to my wife, who I know is now like getting defended and also jumped on by fans who read his thing.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
You're talking
go
about
ahead.
Like a bigger issue now. Like, should pro wrestlers be careful about what they're tweeting? Should we censor ourselves? And my answer to that is I don't think so. I feel like there is something to be said about freedom of speech and people developing and having thick skin. But I believe if you post something, especially like if you post something about someone that I love, that I care about, I'm old-fashioned in the way that, like, I don't want him to get in trouble with anyone, but I just want him to know that he is in trouble with me. I'll be professional, bound for glory, but we're not friends. We're not going to – I'm never going to sit down and admonish him, like, you shouldn't say this because this. No. I'm just going to let my fist do the talking eventually if it comes to that.
Right. What was Taya's reaction? She of course is going to be at the pay-per-view on Sunday. What was her reaction to the entire situation?
She was shocked and laughed it off because it's pretty clear that, like, man, like, this is a dude who's like so insecure about himself that he's lashing out at her, who's not involved in this at all. Pretty ridiculous. But and she's been pretty forthright about the way that she trains and her weight, and it was uncalled for. You know what I mean? She's a wrestler. She's used to dealing with internet haters, people that jump on her and tweet stuff, people that troll her online. So it's not the first time that she's been trolled by a troll, but it's something that she's just had to deal with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she's upset at Austin. She's almost like embarrassed for him.
Right.
Because it's just telling. It's really telling about who he is.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Obviously Bound for Glory, another huge pay-per-view, and it's coming on the heels of the Slammiversary pay-per-view, which was really praised by a lot of people as just, not only one of the best Impact events in recent memory, but really one of the best professional wrestling shows of 2018. Talk a little bit about the current climate in Impact Wrestling heading into an event like Bound for Glory. What's it been like, in the past few months backstage in Impact with the new management in place and with the momentum that the company has right now?
I'd say it's exciting. It's exciting to be backstage in a locker room full of guys with chips on their shoulder who are out to prove that they're the best on the roster every show. There's a lot of pressure to perform. You can't afford to have an off night because the roster is competing to steal the show. And in my opinion, as a performer, this is the type of environment that I like to be in, that I do best in, because that's why I'm doing this. I never was one of the guys that would phone it in. I've always felt like as long as I'm involved in wrestling, especially main events in a pay-per-view, but as long as I'm performing in front of people, I want to perform at my highest level. And that's what's going on right now with Impact Wrestling. Everybody's pushing each other to make everyone their best. And I think you nailed it, man. Like Slammiversary was critically a turning point. The culture in the back and the roster, I think, had already changed before Slammiversary, but it really was the first time like we hit a home run with Slammiversary. People dug it, and now we're at that again with Bound for Glory, the biggest Impact show of the year, and it's an exciting time.
You know, also over the weekend, Abyss, fellow Impact Wrestling star, he's being inducted into the Hall of Fame. You know, a distinction I think you share with him, you know, Abyss is a guy who has stayed true to Impact Wrestling throughout his entire career, and you're someone who, when you left WWE, you never went back. What do you think it is about maybe the current professional landscape, Impact Wrestling, that kept you from going back to WWE? And not to say you're going to speak for a guy like Abyss, but what do you think it is about Impact that has kept him there so long, and seeking work there as opposed to going to a WWE?
I mean, I would say this is a loyal guy, and he's one of the namesakes of Impact Wrestling, one of the people that is the heart and the soul of the company, and certainly a locker room leader and a guy that people on the roster turn to with professional and personal problems. When you're in that spot, it feels to me like, from the way that I see him interacting with the guys in the back, like he's a very, very valuable asset to Impact Wrestling. What he's doing with his time is worthwhile. The stories and things that he's told in the Impact Wrestling ring over the years are top stories of top guys, and have created moments and memories. I mean, that's why anyone gets into pro wrestling. That's why I got into it. Pretty much anybody that's a fan of it, that's why they get sucked into watching it. And if you're working for a place where you feel like your time is being valued, you're telling top stories with top people, I don't know why you'd want to leave.
And then personally for you, you know, what has kept you in a company like Impact as opposed to going back to a WWE?
I mean, all those reasons that I just talked about with Abyss, and
and personally, just you feeling like, you know, because it really has been a significant amount of time.
I just heard like somebody else talking. I was weird.
Okay.
What I was saying was, why did I stay with Impact? All those reasons that I just talked about Abyss, and even more with the turning point of Slammiversary and the excitement of this being a company that is now reinventing itself and becoming something that is commanding attention worldwide. It's a really cool time and an exciting time to be a part of the roster.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us here on The Voice of Wrestling. Of course, Bound for Glory, good luck. Good luck handling Austin Aries, and we hope to talk to you again in the future.
Thanks, brother. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
All right, and welcome back to The Voice of Wrestling. Chris Cash and Nick Paglino. Thanks again for Johnny Impact coming on the show, giving us his time. Hope you enjoyed that. But we still have a few more things to discuss. I know we want to spend a little bit of time on kind of the Saudi Arabia stuff and what's going on in the news there. It's a pretty big deal right now as it relates to WWE, their financial situation.
It just became a bigger deal as we're recording this show.
Oh, really?
Right
Okay,
now.
Very cool. So we're going to talk about that, and of course, maybe some kind of late breaking news here that we can kind of react to in real time. However, I do want to kind of touch on Raw this week. I do think it took somewhat of a step back, Nick, as far as just overall enjoyment. But there were some interesting things that came out of it. And one of the main ones that I know a lot of people are obviously talking about is kind of the turn that did finally happen within the Shield and the Braun, Dolph, Drew storyline that's been going on, where a lot of people were kind of thinking it could be Dean. I really didn't see that being the case, and it turns out that's not what happened. In fact, it looks like Drew McIntyre is on his way for kind of a big singles push, although it was left a little undecided as far as what might happen with him and Dolph Ziggler. But let's open the floor up a little bit as far as the ending of Raw this week, Nick. What I thought turned out to be a really, really good turn there. It all worked really well. Drew McIntyre looked super strong. So talk about, I guess, if you can call this some sort of turn. I don't think he's turning babyface necessarily. That's still unknown. But overall, what do you think? Good decision, bad decision, impartial? What's your take on what happened on Raw this week?
Great decision, because I think we talked about this maybe even months ago when all of this, when the initial pairing really
right
of Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre happened, and then of course the addition of Braun Strowman, and now you're feuding with the Shield. We both sort of agreed that the best thing that could come out of this is Drew McIntyre really getting that push and getting that rub. And I think we both sort of thought that that was the direction that this was going in. You know, the pairing of Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre was to really help get Drew McIntyre over and make him legitimate. You know, I don't think WWE really had to worry about erasing the 3MB memory. I think Drew McIntyre did a great job of that on his own by leaving the company and killing it on the indie scene, then coming back and killing it in NXT, and then coming up to the main roster. I think he did a good job of sort of rinsing off the stench of 3MB. But I think it was very smart for WWE to then align him with high-profile stars such as Ziggler and Strowman and have them work with the Shield. So for me, this is the best way they could go in highlighting and creating a new superstar. A lot of times in situations like this, WWE tends to hold back that guy that we really want to see take the next step. But they allowed Drew McIntyre, the guy who really needs it right now, to shine at the end of Raw this week. And I really like the red herring of Dean Ambrose. Certainly, I still think there's a lot more to be said about the Shield and the direction they should go in, and potentially an eventual turn for Dean Ambrose, which ultimately I think is the best fit for him right now, or maybe in the long term in the coming months. But in the immediate present, I'm really glad to see WWE focusing on making Drew McIntyre stand out as a top star on Raw.
No, I agree with you. And I think, my thoughts is we kind of knew, you mentioned this, that we without a question knew it was going to be Drew McIntyre all along. Now, they still have the tag team championship. So obviously there's still some stuff to kind of work out between the two of them. I would imagine it'll go on for a few weeks, if not longer, potentially. I don't know that a complete split is going to happen because he didn't lay out Dolph Ziggler. It was just Braun, and then of course he leaves. So we'll see how they follow up with that. I wouldn't mind Dolph Ziggler maybe kind of taking more of a backseat role to Drew McIntyre and sticking around, because I think it's just a good fit for Dolph. And I'm, again, as a big fan of his, I don't know what happens to him afterward. But I think at the end of the day, it is time. Drew doesn't need anybody. He doesn't need any help. He doesn't need any assistance on the mic. He's pretty much got the entire package, and he's just looked good from the beginning. He's physical. He's got, the height. He just got a good look to him, and I think he's a unique character. That, look, if they don't go all the way with Braun Strowman here, and if Braun Strowman, Nick, isn't the guy that they want to take the title off of Roman Reigns at any point in the near future, they could be kind of substituting Drew McIntyre at some point, and him taking his place to then go on and challenge Roman Reigns, and maybe he's that guy. I don't know how quickly this push is going to happen and how far they want to take him, but I think that is always a possibility as well. And I hope they don't give up on Braun Strowman. I think they still have a lot of legs left with him as well. But it is kind of an interesting way they're going here, and I'm with you in it. I think it's a good thing. I think Drew McIntyre is ready as long as he has someplace meaningful to go and follow up now. And I don't know if it's a feud with Braun to kind of buy some time, assuming Braun's not taking the title from Roman anytime real soon. That might be a follow-up that they can go in to kind of help get Drew McIntyre over a little bit more, hopefully not at the expense of Braun. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Braun take a fall at some point here in the next couple of months to Drew McIntyre to kind of give him the boost that WWE seems to be wanting to give him right now. But interestingly, another thing, and then of course, we also still in the back, we've heard, I don't know if we got to talk about this last week, Nick, Kevin Owens sidelined for the rest of the year. I know that we were kind of already anticipating this taking place with the Bobby Lashley turn to heel. And so I think Kevin Owens, when he comes back, I would not be surprised if he's not pushed right away as kind of a main event baby face. So real quick, your thoughts on Kevin Owens and what it could mean for him when he comes back.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you never want to see someone go down with an injury. It's horrible to see him go down with an injury. I certainly hope he does not have to miss WrestleMania. That anytime you miss a huge pay-per-view like that, it's just unbelievably unfortunate. But as we saw with Dean Ambrose, that return can then be very special. And I think I would have to imagine the fans are going to pop huge for a Kevin Owens return. And so, using this time, however long it is, if it's a couple of months away from the ring, if it ends up being 9 months away from the ring, utilizing Kevin Owens as a top babyface is probably something WWE could do very well. And in the meantime, you can turn Dean Ambrose heel. So you can kind of trade in one heel for a baby face, switch those spots. I think it would be fresh for both of them. So again, unfortunate, very unfortunate. Wish Kevin Owens a very speedy recovery. Hopefully he can be back within a couple of months. And this is on the minor end of either surgery or injury. But I'd certainly love to see him come back as a baby face. And to sort of put one final cap on the Braun Strowman discussion we had and the Drew McIntyre discussion, I don't want to imply that if Drew McIntyre is getting the push here, that means Braun Strowman is not. So often a lot of people think, well, if one guy is getting pushed, that means someone else isn't, or that must mean WWE's giving up on Braun Strowman. No, absolutely not. They're just creating another star, which is what WWE has to do. And more often than not, it's what WWE doesn't do. They go all in. They cash all their chips in on one superstar, and it's usually at the expense of everyone else. It would be really great to see WWE build multiple stars at one time, and you can do that. And if Braun Strowman isn't the guy to take the title off of Roman Reigns immediately, and I think both of us would agree, I don't think Roman Reigns is dropping that title anytime soon. Having Drew McIntyre butting heads with Braun Strowman is a great way to have Braun Strowman take falls in matches. My guess is, Brock Lesnar is going to take the fall in the match at Crown Jewel. He'll go away. Then you can have that feud maybe where Drew McIntyre costs Braun Strowman the match against Roman Reigns. It's a great way to keep the title on Roman Reigns, but not having Roman Reigns beating Braun Strowman clean in all of their matches. So, I don't necessarily see this as someone being downgraded while someone's being upgraded. Personally, I think it's an upgrade all the way around for the superstars that are involved in this feud.
As we kind of mentioned, though, somewhat Raw wasn't bad. They're certainly trying to shape up the Evolution pay-per-view. A lot of women on the show right now. So if you're a big fan of the women's Evolution, Revolution, whatever you want to call it, clearly you're kind of getting your wish there right now. Nice to see Trish and Lita going to be active heading into this pay-per-view, though. I thought the Ronda Rousey promo with the Bella Twins was really good explanation as to why they're going this direction.
Finally.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the Ronda Rousey people want to see.
Yep.
This is the character people want to see in pro wrestling. I don't know why it takes so long for WWE to execute this kind of a character. They always come in and they always push these baby faces as the smiling, head in the clouds, aloof baby face that just wants to be friends with everybody. It was great. Look at the reaction Ronda Rousey got on Raw. Yes, I know it was in Philadelphia, and anytime you're, making comments about somebody's relationship falling apart or talking internet gossip or social media gossip, that's a crowd. That's certainly a crowd that's going to eat that up. But you can't deny they were great lines. They were stiff shots. It shocked me when I saw it. I mean, I had the same reaction everybody else had, which was, oh, shit. That was literally my reaction. I think a lot of people had that reaction. This is what we've been waiting to see from Ronda Rousey.
Well, I think as far as why maybe it takes them so long to do it, they are a little distracted right now, Nick, which is kind of our second main event for tonight, because there is a lot of real controversy, real life decisions at this point that kind of have to be made. And in case you live under a rock and you don't know what's going on, not to get crazy political, because I'm not even sure I understand the entire circumstances surrounding, but at the end of the day, it was already kind of a touchy subject when it comes to Saudi Arabia and then, of course, WWE's relationship with them taking a buttload of cash to put on these mega events that we've now been looking forward to in Crown Jewel, Shawn Michaels' return match. I mean, a lot of things going on specifically because they're getting paid a ton of money. And ultimately, especially to somebody like Vince McMahon and WWE, money talks. Unfortunately, though, things now in the political landscape, it's kind of taken a turn because it wasn't just WWE's relationship with Saudi Arabia that's been kind of one of those don't ask, don't tell. Like all the way back to previous administrations, as far as presidents go, it's been one of those situations where, yes, we know what you do, Saudi Arabia. It goes against everything that we stand for here in the United States. But we need your oil, etc. We got this relationship, so we're going to turn a blind eye. Well, more recently now in the news, there was an American journalist, right, Nick?
American resident.
Resident, okay. So an American resident that was a journalist that basically now had been, for all intents and purposes, we believe there's footage of him going into some sort of Saudi consulate or something and not coming out the other side. It's been understood that he not only has been murdered, but has been murdered in a very, very grotesque way that Saudi Arabia is denying. But it's really pretty much understood at this point what has happened. And because it was an American resident, it is a big deal. If we've known what they've done in the past, how many people they've murdered, that's not been the issue. But because it's essentially an American, it is now making all the headlines in the world. John Oliver, a very popular pundit on HBO, last week with John Oliver, even had a segment about Saudi Arabia, even mentioned WWE's relationship, even mentioned some of the kind of progressive things that this new, what did you call him? A prime minister? What the hell is he? Like a
Well, yeah, I mean, he was
the new
really,
leader is.
Talking about the propaganda pieces that WWE was putting over,
right?
And then he specifically showed footage of John Cena's promo at the Greatest Royal Rumble,
right,
thanking the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia,
right,
and sort of WWE putting over how progressive they are and the changes that are going on in the company, in the country. But when you scratch the surface of all of those changes, there is a very dark underbelly that exposes they probably really aren't doing many of those things. So WWE is catching flack for the propaganda machine that people appear to be seeing coming out of the Greatest Royal Rumble and then heading into Crown Jewel. And now, of course, with the allegedly murdered journalist, global tensions between America and Saudi Arabia, and now WWE specifically coming under fire.
Well, and I mean, as much as it's also the propaganda, now we've got wrestlers. I think Gail Kim was one of them that just comes to mind. A lot of these wrestlers, especially female, coming out of the woodwork to basically talk about this situation and really denouncing Saudi Arabia, but also specifically telling WWE, like, I do not agree with this. I do not agree with your decision. You don't need the money. You need to cancel these shows. And never mind, Nick, the financial part of it. Never mind some of the logistical complications, the technical complications, all the money WWE might lose or would certainly lose in this situation. They have put out a statement or a little small response. At least I think this was the only response that I had seen, basically saying we are monitoring the situation or the investigation as far as the actual journalist that was allegedly murdered. And so, Nick, what is the latest at this point as far as what maybe WWE is saying? Are there any updates that we're not aware of and that we haven't necessarily mentioned at this point?
The biggest update really is that, Sports Illustrated, along with the New York Post, reported that numerous WWE talents are now very uncomfortable with the idea of traveling to Saudi Arabia and performing in this show. And
Current.
WWE did issue a response to those articles saying that they have established a line of communication with all of their talents and they are continuing to monitor the situation. Quite simply, you play with fire, you get burned, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You knew what you were getting into bed with here. This is like having a dog that's diagnosed with rabies and you hold on to him. You may get good days out of him, but you're going to get some bad days too. And you never know when he's going to snap. And what we're seeing here is the product of getting into bed and doing business with a country like Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people now are looking at this as, in hindsight, WWE just never should have entered into any kind of business agreement with a country like this. They talk about making changes. Well, wait till they make those changes, then do business with them. But what we're seeing here now is WWE is caught in a very, very horrible conundrum, which is we have a deal in place. It's like you bought a car that's on fire. What do you do with this thing now? You have a deal in place, and there could be repercussions of breaking the deal. But now you have a country to side with. And there are major companies, UFC, Viacom, the New York Post. They've all canceled upcoming events that they had planned in Saudi Arabia. Is WWE going to be the one company that says, hey, we're still going over there? What is it going to take? And I think WWE is really starting to feel the pressure now of the choice they made to do business with a country like Saudi Arabia. Now, here's the deal. You want to do business with these people? That's your choice. And the consequences could very well be whether or not viewers continue to support your product. I've seen a lot of people on social media say, I'm canceling my network subscription. I'm done supporting this company. If they do this show, those are the consequences that they'll have to deal with. The deeper problem here now is you are putting your talents at risk if you make them travel to that country. Because to say that they are 100% safe in that country right now would be absolutely ridiculous and untrue. And I think, and I certainly hope, and I would pray upon WWE and impress upon them as much as I can to allow the talents to decide for themselves without repercussion, without backlash, without them then being in the doghouse. If AJ Styles says, I don't want to go to this show, you don't take the title off of him. You allow these talents to decide for themselves if they want to go do this show in Saudi Arabia, because this is now entering what could be an unsafe working environment by having your talents go there. So while WWE didn't say anything other than they've established a line of communication, and they always have had a line of communication with talents that, again, they've issued 2 statements on this, none of which said anything at all. We're monitoring the situation. Everybody's monitoring the situation. My grandmother's monitoring the situation. That doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me what you're doing about it. And what we saw on Raw this week is they're going. They're doing this show. So we know they're doing this show. So, and it was just announced on I just saw the breaking news on my phone. This journalist, his body was cut into pieces. So this is going to continue mounting and going to continue looking worse and worse and worse, not only as a national issue, but as a global issue, and now one that pertains to WWE. So if they don't heed the advice that people are giving them, well, like I said, that's their problem. But I have a problem with them potentially putting their talents in harm's way now. And I certainly, when people say do the right thing, I certainly hope they do the right thing and allowing the talents to decide for themselves without repercussion whether or not they want to go do this show.
So I think, I agree with you 100% on everything that you just said. So I'm not going to play a devil's advocate just to play one. There's a couple of other things, though, that I want to mention. I think what's going to end up happening here, Nick, is if WWE feels like if Vince McMahon at this point feels like he can get away with this next show without a crazy amount of backlash, I don't know. Do we know what's the contract? What's the agreement at this point? Is there supposed to 100% be another show after this?
We don't know.
We don't know. Okay.
The details of the contract, how many shows,
So
I don't know.
it's just a matter of
when they announced it, I believe it was a multi-year deal. So it's not just two shows.
Okay,
so there's definitely a future here.
I'm kind of curious to obviously, they've invested a lot of time, money, and energy into the show already. So can they get past this one and not necessarily break the bank if they decide to cut ties after this one? That's the route that I would imagine that they go before they make some big political stand and say, we're cutting ties now and we're not going to do this show that we've already invested all this time and energy into.
But how bad does that look, saying,
it depends on what comes.
We'll take that paycheck from
I know, but
then we'll end our relationship.
But it depends on what comes out between now and then, Nick, as far as the evidence and this. Because here's the thing, Nick. I mean, it's still allegedly at this point. We don't know 100% that Saudi Arabia was responsible for this man's death and for the grotesque way he was murdered. We do not know that. And that's kind of Vince's and WWE's, story here. That's their excuse of saying, we're monitoring this. And if it comes out, Nick, where our intelligence agencies, the president himself, everybody under the sun that means anything here in the United States comes out and says, we are pretty much 100, or not even, we're 100% positive that this is the way it went down in Saudi Arabia, and their official, they basically had this man murdered in this fashion. Then what do you do if you're Vince? You have to pull out, right?
Well, 100% have to pull out, without a doubt.
So, to me, at least if there's that line in the sand of where WWE's morality versus the money he's going to get paid comes in. Now, I've also been reading a lot about this, Nick, as well, in the sense, kind of a final way we can talk about this is just the idea that maybe, look, this is entertainment and it's not politics. And that entertainment and sports really should kind of stand on their own 2 feet, or on kind of the same foot, basically. They're kind of grouping those things in together and saying, look, this is business. This is not politics. WWE is in no obligation, and by the way, I'm not agreeing with this stance. I'm just saying there are some people saying this, that look, they're not obligated to take a political stand because it's an American journalist now, even our country itself can do business with Saudi Arabia. They're not cutting ties with them, but now that it's an actual American, then we're going to say, no, wait, we've had enough. We've known how they were. This is, we're not uncovering anything new here. With the fact that this could have happened, that the possibility of this happening was always there.
And the president is coming under fire for, supporting the regime and sort of praising the progressive nature of the regime. So he's coming under fire as well as WWE. So yes, it's not like the WWE is the isolated entity here, that's coming under fire for doing business with them.
Well, first and foremost, we can talk about the president and who he praises and what he says and what he does all day long. But in the end, as far as just related to WWE at this point, though, it does come down to it. If I'm Vince McMahon, yes, I have politics, and he's very much a Republican. Him and his wife, clearly, it's been stated, she ran as a Republican. There's no bones about it. They are America first. So, but here's where they have screwed up now. Over the past how many years, Nick? How many times are they are they highlighting their love and support for the troops.
Yep.
And their love for our country.
Yep.
Every single year, they are having a massive, massive to-do about that particular cause. It's very near and dear to them. So they're very much American first. And at the end of the day, when you're basically saying that, look, we mean this, but only up to a point. If it breaks our bank, if it breaks our wallet in any way, shape, or form, then we really don't mean it all that much, because yes, they probably killed this American, but we are still, look, did you see the amount of zeros? Like, that's the message that they're putting out there.
Oh, yeah. 100%. And they're negating what they're doing is they're exposing. And I've said this before. I think I've said this on this show. Capitalist companies that are just trying to make a dime, that are trying to make as much money as they can. They don't do anything without their bottom line being of chief importance. The supporting the troops, the be a star thing that WWE does, the teaming up with Susan G. Komen, the Hispanic Awareness Month, all of these philanthropic things that WWE does, it's all for good PR, because at the end of the day, it's going to make them look like a better company, and them looking like a better company is going to make them more money. Now, I want to be very clear here. WWE is not the only one that does this. That's every company out there. That's what big business is. Big business at the end of the day is about making money. So no one should be surprised by any of this. Big business takes the paycheck and takes the money when it's there to be made. And all of the bullshit, all of the we care about the kids, and we're doing this children's rally, and we're doing this philanthropy over here, and we're going to hold every year, we're going to do the support the troops. It's all for better PR. And right now they are facing what could be a PR crisis and a PR nightmare right now, which is that, yes, it may not have been confirmed that Saudi Arabia is responsible for this death. But I think the general opinion here is, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And other companies are falling in line. And other companies, and listen, I'm not praising those companies. I'm not praising Viacom. I'm not praising the New York Times for pulling out of Saudi Arabia. They're doing it. They're all doing it to save face. To say, oh, well, we got to do this. We don't want to look bad, and we want to make sure we still make money. It's all a PR move. If WWE doesn't fall in line with this, what message, like you said, are you sending? You're telling me that all of these efforts, equal rights for women, right? You've got the first ever women's pay-per-view coming up. And you're going to go hold. I mean, and that was an argument way back when.
Well, about to say that,
greatest Royal Rumble.
Exactly, because that was already
go into a country. Your women aren't even allowed.
That was already being those were already conflicting messages that they were putting out.
There. You know, well, like I said, you're playing with fire here. They knew who they were getting in bed with. I'm sure they never expected it to blow up like this. They knew the spin they could put on the woman thing, because they knew that going in. Okay, well, here's what we can do. We're going to say we're helping them, and we're going to help teach them, and help them evolve. And then one day, if women are allowed to wrestle in Saudi Arabia, they can take credit for it. So they knew the PR spin there. In this case, how are they going to spin themselves out of it? And if they do that show, if this situation with Saudi Arabia keeps spiraling downward and downward and downward, and they do this show, how in the hell are they going to justify not only doing that show, but everything else they've done in the past, where we're supposed to look at them as this beacon and this bright shining star of a company?
And let me wrap up by saying that I think what this ultimately is going to come down to, this is a pretty good opportunity for kind of a hero moment for Vince McMahon. And it's, which is more important to him, to be respected, to be known, to be loved, etc. Is the hero card going to be more important to him than his checkbook? Because that's really where we're at now. It comes down to Vince could come out and not only save face, but win so many points with so many people, because at the end of the day, he's coming out and saying, I'm losing this much money for this decision, but I know it's the right thing to do. And so is he more vain than he is a business guy? I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb. Again, I don't know Vince McMahon. I do know one very true fact about Vince McMahon, and that he is very business driven. He's very smart as it relates to business. Mm-hmm. And here's what I think. This decision is not Vince McMahon's at this point. I mean, it is, but it's Vince McMahon is not going to pull out in my mind. Like, I don't think Vince McMahon is going to play, is going to have some sort of moral compass that leads him to say, this is my problem. This is my fight. This is what I should do. This is what my company should do. We're obligated at this point to follow suit with some of these others. We're gonna walk away from this amount of money, and we're gonna pull out. I don't think he makes that decision on his own. I think he is forced to make that decision at some point if it keeps going the way that it's going. If it keeps going the way that it's going and enough people come out against it, and then it does start affecting his bottom line. Not that I think a lot of wrestling fans are going to care as much about this as they do the show itself. I don't think wrestling fans, that demographic necessarily is very political. So I don't know that they're all going to care. I don't know that they're going to lose viewerships. I mean, maybe, I don't know that it's going to move the needle enough, but I think enough sponsors, enough major players can come out, because that's where it truly hurts WWE at that point. When their image becomes so tarnished by this decision to stick this out, then your stock starts falling. Then things really start taking place where Vince has no choice but to make a different decision. And I think that's the only point in which he is going to pull out and make a massive decision to do so. Not just for this show, but the next, or for this show. I don't think it comes a moment sooner until the actual numbers reflect the backlash. Otherwise, it's just a lot of noise to Nick, or to Vince, Nick, and that's what I think is going to happen. But it is certainly ramping up now, and it does not seem like, Nick, with the new reports that come out, that this story is going away anytime soon. No. And the closer, Nick, or that they get to this pay-per-view, and they go accept that money, knowing what we know now and knowing what we could potentially know then in terms of facts about this case and about this journalist, man, he better be ready to face the heat if he's going to stay in the kitchen. I mean, it could get ugly. So
no doubt about it. And,
interesting though. We want to know.
And like you said, if there's one thing you can say about Vince McMahon with concrete assurance, he's a great businessman, and you would figure he will do what's right for business, not only immediate business, right, but long-term.
Exactly.
Business.
Yeah, I mean, because the indirect consequences of this, I mean, take the money now, lose the money later. He might see the difference there. That, I mean, I give him a lot of credit as a good business guy. I think he makes the right decision when it's time to kind of make that call, but that's a lot of money to walk away from. So it is a huge decision, and I'm glad that I'm not in his shoes, because it would be a difficult one to make. And it's not black and white as some people want to say that it is. It is in a lot of ways. There's no question. But is it WWE's fight? There is an argument to be had there that, it's not a judgment on his moral character because he decides to go take some crazy amount of money when, he's not doing the killing. He's not condoning it. But if the facts come out and our intelligence agencies and everybody that we know and trust in this country decide it is 100% that they murdered that American journalist, you have no choice. You have no choice at that point but to pull out or face the crazy repercussions that I think would come as a result of it. Guys, we want to know what you think, so please let us know. Obviously, a lot discussed as far as Impact Wrestling, our interview with Johnny, of course, the state of WWE and Drew McIntyre's turn or separation, I guess is a better word for it now. And then, of course, the Saudi Arabia and WWE relationship and how that's starting to really heat up in conversation and what's the right and wrong thing to do and what's going to take place. So please let us know in the comments below wherever you're watching this, and can't wait to read them. That is Nick Paglino. I am Chris Cash. This has been the Voice of Wrestling, and we will see you next week.